sometimes when you sit with the person you're trying to design for or innovate for, and you're obviously not the expert, they'll take you under their wing and explain, no, this is how it really works.
What's happening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Mullins Muster Podcast, where we talk about all different aspects of leadership, and we talk about it with industry-leading experts. Thanks so much for being here. As always, if we're adding value to you, your family, your organizations, please do us a favor, leave a rating and review. Today's episode is brought to you by Humble Leader Development. Humble Leader Development is a leadership organization that strives to make people and organizations better through speaking, training, and consultation. If you want to find out more about Humble Leader Development, then check them out on Facebook and Instagram. Today's episode is part one of an interview that I had with Robb Olsen. Robb Olsen has spent his entire adult life in the innovation industry, worked for over 35 years at Proctor and Gamble, has over 50 patents to his name, and recently started his own company called TransOrbital Dynamics. I met Robb as I was a student of his several months ago in an innovation course, and as we walked our way through it, I realized that it's not just innovation. There are so many different leadership aspects that go into innovation, and I had to have him on the podcast. He was gracious enough to be here, and so sit back and enjoy part one of my interview with Robb Olsen. So Robb, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being on here. For everybody who does not know who Robb Olsen is, you worked for over 35 years at Proctor and Gamble. Got over 50 patents to your name. You served as,
I do.
Yeah, you served as an adjunct professor at Northwestern University, NC State, Penn State, and you're starting some new programs out of Duke. You and I were just talking about it before we started the podcast. Excited about that. You own and operate TransOrbital Dynamics, and then you and I actually met because you're also an instructor for an Air Force and University of Michigan cohort, Project Mercury, and AIMHI. What else do you want people to know, man? I mean, you're super busy. You got a lot going on. What else do you want people to know about you?
So I've spent all this time in innovation, right? And I've done it all over the world. And when you do it all over the world in all these different cultures with all these different kinds of people, you really start to understand the essence of it. You start to get through the cultural overlays and you drill down into the science of it. So that's why on LinkedIn, my first phrase is innovation science or science of innovation, because there is one. And sure, there's some art to innovation too, but there's also a whole bunch of science. And if you work hard enough at it, you can start to figure some of that stuff out. So I guess the other thing I'd want people to think about me as is an innovation scientist.
Before we roll into some of that, tell us about some of the patents you have. Like I said, you have over 50 to your name, and I know 35 years Procter and Gamble. There's some pretty big things that you are a part of. What are some of the ones you're most proud of? Some of the ones that people may be the most familiar with?
So there's a familiarity, I don't know, because a whole bunch of my patents are in femcare. There were a couple, though, that I was particularly proud of in that space because we did some things that people said couldn't be done. So we made things stretch that people said wouldn't stretch. We put wings on that stretched and conformed to the body and the underwear and stuff like that. And then we put a certain pattern into the absorbent material that made that fold in a very specific way. And those patents and those design features were on those products for more than 2 decades. And I just went to buy some examples for class, and they finally moved on from those. But for more than 2 decades, those patented features, they called them flexi wings, and we estimated the value of those patents once in terms of increased sales for P&G over those 2 decades, and it was over $2 billion. So wow, that was pretty cool.
That is cool.
That is cool. Now, I got to ask, how difficult was it for you to do some of the research, some of your scientific research to get after some of these feminine care products? I would imagine that if you're conducting this type of research and getting after these types of products, you probably ran into a lot of hurdles just because you're a man. There's probably a lot of people that said, hey, I don't think you belong in this arena. So how did you overcome some of that?
Well, that's for sure true. I'll answer that a couple different ways. So first of all, in products research at Procter and Gamble, that was my role. It's called products research. The idea was we research the products, but then create the new products and the new propositions that P&G takes to market. Now, overall at P&G, by the time I left, I've been in the minority gender-wise for a long time. It's 72% female, all scientists and engineers who do that work. And then in FemCare, you bet there are people who thought that guys can't design for women in that space. You have a lot of internal bias and external bias. But here's the thing, sometimes when you sit with the person you're trying to design for or innovate for, and you're obviously not the expert, they'll take you under their wing and explain, no, this is how it really works. You wouldn't know that because you're a guy, okay?
Yeah.
And so there could be an advantage to it as well in terms of digging in. Also, I sat in the back room a lot, so there were times I was out there right in front doing the interviewing. There were times I was observing. And one of my biggest compliments in doing that FemCare design work was when somebody finally said, this product is so great, I know a woman designed this. And I'd be in the back room going, thank you. I even had a little discussion once on LinkedIn with a behavioral scientist, and she goes, you have to admit, Rob, that only women can design things like feminine care products. And she didn't know who I was. And I go, yeah. Well, now there's these 50 patents I have, most of them in FemCare. Right? So it just says that when you're doing innovation professionally, this is a great point. When you're doing innovation professionally, you are often not the target audience for your innovation. So you have to be really good that's why that first step is building empathy for those you're serving with your innovations. You have to be really good at setting you aside and understanding those people you're trying to serve with your innovations. All of those stakeholders, could be the end users, could be the senior leaders who have to approve it, could be the people who have to manufacture it. You got to understand all those people and make it a win for all of them.
That takes some time too. That is not an overnight process at all.
Correct.
So yeah,
I mentioned a skill that everybody has, right? And so you can acquire that skill, but it is not a skill most people walk in the door of a business with.
Like I mentioned earlier, you and I met recently. I was with a student of yours during an AIMHI cohort. And AIMHI stands for Academia, Industry, Military, Hybrid Innovations. And we went through a lot of that process. And I understand what you're saying, that it's not made for everybody. And it can be difficult at times for sure. But can you tell us how you kind of got involved with AIMHI and this whole Air Force University of Michigan cohort?
Yeah, it starts with a very revealing story about my wife, Kate, and I. Of course, Kate was a co-instructor. I was getting towards the end of my P&G time, and she was up at co-teaching at University of Michigan, and she saw a flyer for Jeff DeGraff's class, Certified Professional Innovator class. And she goes, hey, this looks interesting, Rob. Why don't we give this to each other for our anniversary gift? So we signed up for DeGraff's Certified Professional Innovator class. And that's how we met Jeff. And of course, AIMHI, it's based on that Certified Professional Innovator course that Jeff created at University of Michigan. So we met the DeGraffs, and besides taking the course and learning all those principles, we had a lot of fun with it. As we got to know Jeff and Stanley DeGraff, we liked them and they liked us. So we had dinner together and started to hang out together. When Stanley was looking for somebody to teach this next cohort of AIMHI, she gave me a call. Now, she gave me a call about 4 days before the cohort started. So had to kind of drink from the fire hose on that one. But we made it through that. That turned out well. And then for your cohort, we really elevated the game and brought in much tougher challenges for you all. We did your cohort in 8 weeks due to some scheduling issues. Normally it'd be more like 10 to 12. And I bet you missed that time.
Yeah. It was a fast and furious 8 weeks. It was a fast and furious 8 weeks for sure.
But think about it. You guys went from blank sheet of paper to pitching something to senior leaders, general officers, and 5 out of 8 of those things got funded and went to the next step. That's pretty amazing. And that's why I like AIMHI. And I do this kind of work with industry. And also I do this kind of work in academia, at Northwestern. This is kind of how we did it also. And so another way that I think about what AIMHI is it's that whole competing values framework. And I know we're going to talk about that a little more here as the time goes on, and kind of mashed up with Robb stuff, which I shared with you guys as that innovation arc. When you combine those two things, you get something really powerful, and you can make some really rapid progress against some really tough challenges. So that's why I said yes when Stanley called.
The competing values framework is really just kind of a personality test for innovation, is really what it is. But it was so enlightening for us because we got put into teams. I don't know how the teams were chosen, but teams were chosen. And that's when we showed up, we were put with our teams. And that was very first thing. And so everybody from the get-go, they knew their color, like you're blue, red, green, yellow. So people knew right off the bat, I'm a blue. Blue likes to compete. And so very high blue and a little bit of red dabbled in there. But can you kind of break down what it truly means towards getting after the science of innovation?
Yeah, I can. And do you mind if I pop up the basic framework on the screen real quick?
Yeah.
You should be seeing the basic 4 quadrants of the competing values framework there. Let's just go around the circle real quick because you already got us started. There's that yellow quadrant, collaborate. That's a predisposition of people to connect with other people and ensure that they're aligned and ensure the communication is good, ensure we're all heading in the same direction, okay? Highly valuable skill when it comes to collaboration. Keep going around. There are the people who are creative, want to do new things. And it's fun to think of these people as kind of extremes, okay? So want to do new things. Who's a want to do new things person? Elon Musk. There's a person who just is hardwired to always come up with a creative solution, whatever the problem is. Then in compete, and I show the person on the dirt bike there. I'm kind of envious of that. That's what I always wanted to be, that dirt biker. That's the person who wants to win. Their highest value is how do we get things done now in a way that we come out on top. Then there's control. Then I show the precision flying team there. And so those are folks who do things right, okay? It's the rules, it's the process. Every one of those is an essential skill for innovation. Every one of those is necessary to go from idea to market or idea to adoption. This was originally created to understand why certain organizations excelled at growth and profitability while others fell behind. Originally, it was an organizational model. And the idea eventually grew, and I think Jeff helped drive a lot of this, to be applied at the individual level as well. And boy, does this model work. At P&G, I've seen them all. Myers-Briggs, every kind of personality assessment. This is the one that had enough scientific rigor behind it. And 2, happened to be that old quote from Vox, all models are wrong, some are useful. Okay, this one's useful. And so you said, how do we form the teams? We look at the assessment, the competing values assessment of each student in a cohort like AIMHI. I do it in my classes too. I'll be doing it at Duke this fall. I did it at Penn State. And we construct the teams to have representation from all these quadrants, and they become much stronger. Because you can imagine what happens when you have nothing but blues. I want to win. I want to win. I want to win. Oh, we're not going to bother doing research. How do we win? And it just goes on, right? And so every one of these is important. And when you have this diversity on teams are much stronger and they deliver much better results. And that's kind of all I care about. I'm in academia. I also have all that industry background. And what does industry care about? Does it work?
I thought this was fantastic because I'll be honest, when I first put my name in the hat to go to the course and be a part of it, I really thought that everybody needed to be green. In order to be innovative, you had to be creative. And this really just kind of proved me wrong, and it showed just how important it is to have such a diverse team within the innovation realm and the whole scientific process.
You need that creativity. You need to think outside the box. But then if all you do is think outside the box, nothing changes.
Yeah.
Because you need the yellows to go, hey, we got to align some people to this. And you need the reds to go, okay, well, if you're going to do it that way, how do we codify that? And you need the blues to say, yeah, very creative. How do we put it over the finish line so that, our bosses agree? And so it becomes so natural and obvious. Once you've worked with this framework a little while, it just becomes this natural, obvious thing. And the other thing is, all of us have some tendencies in this regard, but the older we get, the more skilled we get, usually we get more flexible across these domains too. And certainly, at least by being aware of them, we can value other team members who are on the team doing their part. And eventually, like in my case, I start out way green, but I've got pretty strong blue and yellow. And then every once in a while, like DeGraff makes me be red. Because DeGraff's like, well, we'll just do it. I have to dust off those not very polished red skills that I have. And I go, okay, if we're going to do it that way, then.
Well, I think that's important too, though, is that everybody has a little bit of all of that in them. Yeah. So you definitely have your strong suit, you're super green, and I, for example, super blue, but there's a little bit of green in there somewhere for me, and there's a little bit of red somewhere in there for you. And that holds true for everybody. And once people start to see it, and they start to see where everybody's strong suits are, then they can relate a little bit better. And I think that really helps the team mesh. There seems to be a million different 80-20 rules out there, depending on what industry you're in, what you're trying to get after. But of course, innovation is no different. They have their own 80-20 rule. And basically, it's just saying that if you can get 20% of the people bought into innovation, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if you can get 20% of the people bought into the innovation, then at that point, the ball will really start to roll. Is that correct?
That is correct. And there's actually a couple of versions of the 80-20 rule. And so you just mentioned a really critically important one. And in fact, I'm working with some of the AIMHI sponsors. We're planning some other things. I'm going to be doing Project Mercury this summer at Wright Pat Air Force Base. And so we're talking about what percentage of the audience do we need to reach? And there is research. Research is, lots of times research is very narrow but deep, right? There is research that says, one, there's tipping point in an organization. What is this, where if you get enough people aligned, then the new thing becomes true. And you just alluded to that. You don't have to convince every individual. You have to convince a critical mass of folks. The other part of that 80-20 rule, well, and the reason that first one is, let me just finish on that. The reason that first one is so important is it seems overwhelming to think that you're going to convince everybody in the Air Force to do something a new way. 387,000 or however many are in the Air Force or the Guard or the whole military or God forbid the whole US or the whole world. And in industry, we had that too. I mean, P&G made mass market products. So how am I going to get everybody to use this new tie? Well, don't try to get everybody to use the new tie. Figure out who those prime prospects are, who has the biggest need for the new thing. It's not every single person who does their laundry. It's people who have problem X, Y, and Z. That's not every single person. But if you get a critical mass of those, you can launch a new brand, or you can launch a flanker, and it can be highly profitable and that sort of thing. So that same logic applies. The other part of 80-20 is that 80, or I use an even higher percent, 95% of every organization, 99% of every big successful organization is out there doing what that organization does today. They're turning the crank, right? They're producing today's result. Notice what they're not producing: a new thing. They are trained, they are paid, they are rewarded, they are promoted for doing a great job of today's business or whatever that organization produces. So innovators are out at the fringes. They're out at the edges. So that big curve, the bulk of the people don't care about change, don't care about innovation. They care about getting done their job today. If they're good people, they care about doing it with excellence. And so I kind of think of that as the operational excellence domain. And it's the vast majority of every big organization. It's a truism. And so what are these poor innovators doing out here at the edges? Well, we're the 20 that's trying to teach the 80 how to survive as the world changes. So we're out there at the fringes. And it's important to understand that innovation is a fringe activity. It is not the main activity of the organization. And it's hard for innovators to admit that, especially greens, and being one. I get that. Okay. It took me a long time to admit that I was in the fringe. No, I wanted to be mainstream, man. Yeah. And then I learned what it takes to be mainstream. I go, how boring to just turn the crank, get paid a lot. But,
yeah.
Okay, it just wasn't me, right? So I figured out who I was, and I was like, okay, I operate at the fringe. But by understanding that you operate at the fringe, you get that you have a job, and that's to steer the other 80% or 90 or 95% into a new direction when appropriate. It also means that the job is very hard. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things, those challenges that emerge and ways around those to get people to actually go down the path of adoption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think it's, you point out the innovators, they're on the fringes, but they are vital to the organization, because the only thing constant in life is change.
Yep.
And without those innovators, we're not going to keep up with what's going on within the industry that we're serving. And so they're a small percentage, like you said, but vitally important. And I thought that was, again, extremely eye-opening from my perspective. So that was great.
Yep. We're just trying to make sure there's an Air Force in 10, 20, 50 years, that there's a Proctor and Gamble in 10, 20, 50 years, right?
Yeah. You explained some of those 80-20 rules. And then you had us go through an exercise called 100 shots on goal. And we just got together and we had sticky notes as far as the eye could see, and a whiteboard, and we're just throwing ideas down on pieces of paper, and nothing was off limits. We could do anything and everything, think as big and as bold as you wanted to. How difficult was it to see through some of those hurdles? Because and when people start putting down ideas, their ideas become the best ideas because it's their idea.
Right.
When they're within the team, how difficult was it to overcome some of those hurdles and lead those teams through, okay, this one may not be the best, this is a better way to go? Like, how did you work through some of that?
So that 100 shots on goal is explicitly designed to get people to not fall in love with a single idea, right? It's specifically designed to help address that. And so if you start with 100, you can't help but go, holy cow, there are a lot of ways we could do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then, if you recall, we asked you to divide your 100 shots into the 4 quadrants. What's a very people-oriented yellow idea? And what's a very green, way outside the box idea? And what's a very blue, we're going to win idea? And what's a very red, we're going to do it exactly right idea? Then you had a bunch of those. And then we had you mash them up. Mash a people idea with a win idea. What does that look like? Mash a create idea with a control idea. This wild outside the box, but how would we standardize it? Mash that up, right? And then that starts to break people loose a little bit from the thing they walked in the door in love with, right? And one of the sayings that's repeated all the time by people who do big innovation, coach big innovation, teach big innovation is, don't fall in love with your solution. Fall in love with the problem and the people you're trying to serve.
Love it.
And so if you fall in love with the problem, the people you're trying to serve, that's where the phase that you mentioned that comes after the 100 shots on goal is you have this hugely divergent thing, 100 shots, and then a convergent thing. Well, okay, what do we think the best 5 or 10 of these are? All right, now let's get started talking to folks, living in their world, the world of the folks we're trying to serve, and let's start exposing them to our ideas and getting their feedback. And then that's the human-centered part. This is in large part human-centered design. It's not pure design thinking, but it's got a bunch of design thinking stuff in it. It's not pure jobs to be done, but it's got a lot of job stuff in it. It's not pure Clayton Christensen disruptive innovation, but it's got a lot of that stuff in it. So the way you converge is to converge by staying focused on those people you're trying to serve, not on yourself, right?
I really hope you enjoyed part 1 of my interview with Robb Olsen. Today's Bible verse comes from Romans 12:2, and it says, "Do not be conformed of this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." You guys have a great month, and we'll see you next time. Take care.